Alright, so let's go ahead and get into the juicy stuff. Let's go ahead and get into spoilers. Turn off now, turn back now if you haven't seen the movie. I'm going to spoil it in... now. Yup, he's Khan. He was Khan. I went to the movie going, if he's going to be Khan, I'm not going to like that. It doesn't make any sense, because I don't care what kind of time-warping nonsense. You cannot turn an Indian man, or a Latino man as the actor was, you can't turn him white. There is no way that Ricardo Montalban can become a white British man. That doesn't make any sense, in any way, shape or form. And people can come out with the whole, oh, it's a reboot, it's a reimagining. Yes, it is. But it's not a straight-up reboot, it's not a straight-up reimagining. In the new Superman Man of Steel, Perry White can be black because it's not meant to be the same timeline. This movie and this continuity was set up on the principle that this is the same people in the same universe in a different timeline to that universe. So, even though things may look different, the characters may act different, and they may be different people, they still have to be the same gender. They still have to be the same race. They still you understand what I'm saying there. But with that said, it can be simply explained away at the back of your mind thinking, of course, when he got together with Admiral Robocop, Admiral Marcus, which was Carol Marcus's dad, get into that in a second. Once he got together with Marcus, Marcus changed his appearance for plastic surgery. He had his hair cut off and turned him to make him look like a white man in almost a James Bond way from Die Another Day, to make him look white, to hide his appearance and turn him into John Harrison. That makes sense. That possibly will what maybe in some sort of comic material or book material out there that'll get released that'll explain it for fans as to why he is a British white man. With that said, my initial reaction to that was completely washed away by the performance, completely washed away by the movie. I sat through this movie with a huge smile on my face. I sat through this movie coming out of it going, yes, he was Khan, but I don't care because he was so good and he was so Khan without being, the whole race, that I did not care about my problems with the logic there, and that can just be explained away by, plastic surgery can be said in the comics. I would have liked to lie in there to explain that, but whatever, moving on. And of course, his whole involvement with Admiral Marcus, who was Carol Marcus's dad, who was introduced in this movie, the whole involvement seems to be around that this USS Vengeance was a Section 31 ship. The entire plot of this movie comes from a Star Trek Deep Space Nine concept. That right there tells you that these people know their Star Trek this time around. They've done a bit more research. There's a whole opening bit where the whole thing is about the Prime Directive and proving why the Prime Directive is correct. Something like that would not have been in the last movie. And certainly referencing Section 31 and using Section 31, it seems like, definitely would not have been in the last movie. Be it the writers, be it Abrams, be it some producers, somebody's gone out their way to see more Star Trek this time around and listen to the fans and given more things for Star Trek fans in this movie, and that was an example for me. The set pieces, the action pieces of the Enterprise crashing, which the trailers completely made you think that it was the Enterprise crashing, but it wasn't, it was the Vengeance, which was a great play when you saw the Enterprise going underneath the clouds. You're like, oh crap, here we go, Generations, all over again, Enterprise A is going to come into it early. No, the Enterprise survives, they managed to do it, and that was a great way to put the ship, who you didn't believe it was going to get destroyed, in jeopardy, because A, they've done stuff like this before with Vulcan, and B, it said in the trailers that this was going to happen, so you were waiting for it to happen, and it doesn't happen. That was a great way to play with the fans there. But getting back to Khan, he was Khan, even though he wasn't Khan. The way he was at the end, he was definitely getting into that Ricardo Montalban sort of... He didn't start quoting Moby Dick or anything, but at the same time, as much as you want him to start going, I spits my last breath at thee, it doesn't make any sense, because the whole point of him doing that in that movie was the fact that he'd read Paradise Lost and Moby Dick and stuff, why he was trapped on SETI Alpha 5, so without that, he wasn't that, and if you watch the original Space Seed, certainly that Khan is this Khan. I mean, maybe if he had started backhanding Carol Marcus, then it would have been completely in line, but of course, gender politics have completely changed since the 60s. And also, the point that comes to me in the terms of race and things like that is when they showed Khan's followers in the torpedo, they showed that they looked Indian. They had the long hair, they had that look. So it makes me think again that Khan was genetically altered. I just wish that that wasn't, let's say, a deleted scene that we're going to get on the DVD or in the comics. I wish that would have been just like with them being on Rura Penthe, Nero being on Rura Penthe in the last movie. I wish this had actually been in the movie. And speaking of Khan, that is pretty much the most that I have to say on this film, in that this pretty much was what a lot of people feared it was going to be. Now, if you completely are against the idea of them remaking, essentially, Wrath of Khan, you're going to be disappointed, because that is essentially what this movie is. They've got Carol Marcus, they've got a Doomsday device, they have got, Khan, obviously, and his followers and things like that. They've got Khan stealing a Federation starship and fighting the Enterprise with it, with the Enterprise being on the losing side. And, of course, the end, in one of those ones that was completely for the fans. They completely mirrored the end of Star Trek II, with Kirk going in the radiation chamber, and then they had the up against the glass moment, but in reverse, because Kirk's the one that sacrifices himself, and Spock's the one who's mourning his death, and on the other side, wanting him to get him out of there, and Scotty telling him they'll flood the whole compartment, and the lines at that point were completely Wrath of Khan. I could not believe how much they were referencing it. There was Spock sitting there on the bridge, and you better get down here, just like at the end of it. And Spock's running down the corridors as things are happening, cutting to it, and Spock's running down, and Scotty's telling them not to go in there, he'll flood the whole compartment, and they're up against the glass. It was completely the end of Wrath of Khan, but in reverse, in sort of playing with the idea that this is another timeline. So if this is sort of a mirror universe, let's say, but not the mirror universe, obviously, if this is another timeline of the universe, to swap those two's roles in this makes a lot of sense. I can see people being upset that Kirk just comes back alive, although the setup was completely there, it was completely obvious. As soon as Kirk died, I was like, A, they're not going to kill Captain Kirk, and B, there was that whole thing where Bones was bringing the Tribble back to life with Khan's blood. The thing that doesn't make sense is the fact that all of Khan's followers are also genetic supermen, so they could have used their blood, so why did they have to get Khan's? But that's one of those ones that you just have to put aside and ignore the logical side of your mind on. But yeah, I really enjoyed that. Kirk just comes back to life, just like, again, in parallel, just like when Spock just comes back to life, except they didn't wait a whole movie to do it this time. There wasn't a Star Trek 3, The Search for Kirk. Which makes more sense to me, because of course there's no sort of Catra, there's no sort of way to bring him back, apart from when they set up this whole plot device of the Khan's blood and stuff. But I will say this to you now. I was one of the ones who was fearing this would be that. It would be a remake of Khan, but it exceeded my expectations. It's completely turned me around on it and was okay with the idea. They freeze Khan and his followers at the end, completely setting up for a Wrath of Khan Type 2 comeback of Khan, so they can do that in the future. Carol Marcus is now a crewman on the Enterprise, which is a completely new twist, and whether Kirk and her are going to hook up, probably. Whether there's going to be a David out of that, that's set up for the next movie. Speaking of set up for the next movie, the whole sort of thing at the start of this is about they don't want to start a war with the Klingons, and it seems like the next movie is going to be about that war with the Klingons. Some people wanted it in this movie, myself included, but it looks like they're setting it up. They completely do an international incident that would cause it, absolutely. And when they go to the planet, we get the Klingons for the first time, on screen and not in the deleted scenes. We get to see sort of prototype Bird of Preys. And then I loved the way that they did it without saying it. They did the reveal without saying it was a reveal, without Uhura going, oh my god, you have forehead ridges. They had the whole thing where they had the forehead ridge mask, which kind of is a nice replacement, almost in a way of not to be horrible in the way I'm comparing this, but how women, when they get breast cancer and they have them taken off and then they'll wear fake ones in replacement, the way that the Klingons wear the masks as sort of replacement for their foreheads, but then they take off the mask, or the lead one does, and he has the ridges. The design of the Klingons were changed, but not enough. They still pretty much look like Klingons, except they had contact lenses in, and he didn't have a mustache or the hair, but other Klingons could have. It's just this one, I guess, is the General Chang of these Klingons. But no, the reveal of that and showing, because Uhura pretty much was talking to them as if she was a Klingon, because of course she was black, and in the original series the Klingons were just black people with Fu Manchus. So she's thinking that our forehead ridges, they take it off, and they do have forehead ridges. And I liked the way that reveal was handled, how subtly that reveal was handled, and I don't think people other than Star Trek fans who know that they're not supposed to have the forehead ridges at this point, I don't think anybody else will get that apart from myself and other Trekkies. On a aside with that, in terms of listening to the fans, did anybody notice that the warp effects were more like the original warp effects from the original canon now, as in they left more of a streak effect? That was interesting, wasn't it? One of the things I really liked in this was that they dealt with consequences, and they actually called it out. Kirk, you were promoted from cadet to captain. You obviously weren't ready. We did it on impulse. It was ridiculous. So you're going to go back to the academy. You're going to learn how to be a captain because you went and broke the Prime Directive and all that. And then, through the course of this movie, he learns how to be a captain, he earns his tenure, he earns his ship. At the end, they're going off on the historic 5-year mission, with Carol Marcus as one of the members of the crew. Just a really well done sort of setup to prove why Kirk should be the captain, and answering all those claims from, fanboys who were saying, what the fuck, cadet to captain. And Kirk giving we all wanted Pine to do the Space the Final Frontier thing. He does it, not to the original but he does do it as it's kind of his inauguration speech for him taking command of the ship, which is interesting, to say the least. Every captain says that when he takes command of the ship, does he? Okay, I guess you just change the ship name or whatever and change the length of the mission, what have you. Admiral Marcus being played by Peter Weller was Carol Marcus's dad. That was an interesting thing, sort of putting that